Wyoming Territory. Early autumn of 1882, the wind carried the burn of distant smoke and the silence that followed a goodbye no one planned to say. Willa Grant sat hunched on the splintered porch of her father's ranch house, arms wrapped tight around her middle, her blue cotton dress stained with dust and tears. The sun was low, bleeding gold across the edge of the hills, but she did not notice. Her breath came in shallow bursts, shaking with the weight of every hour that had passed since the letter arrived. Her father was gone. Died in Cheyenne 2 weeks before, alone and without warning. She had buried her mother 2 winters prior, and now, at 22, she stood as the last of the Grants with a ranch to run, 2 younger siblings to raise, and no one left to lean on, except they were not her siblings. Not by blood. Willa. It was the smaller voice that pulled her back. Josie, barely 6, barefoot and standing in the doorway. Her brown curls were tangled and her thumb was still tucked into her mouth. Behind her, 5-year-old Jonah clutched his ragged toy horse, eyes wide, watching his sister cry. I'm fine, Josie," Willa whispered, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand, trying to be the adult. She reached out and pulled the girl into her lap. "Go on inside, I'll be in soon." Josie hesitated, then nodded and slipped away. Willa waited until the door shut. Then her shoulders dropped and she let herself cry again. Quiet, broken sobs that echoed into the wide, empty land. A horse's hooves crunched along the dirt road behind the house. She did not lift her head. Whoever it was they could ride on. She had nothing left to say. But the rider did not pass. The sound stopped, boots hitting the ground and then the slow creak of steps on wood. She felt the porch dip under the weight of someone sitting beside her. She turned her head just enough to see him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dusty from the trail. His hat was in his hands and his eyes clear, steady met hers with a softness that made her chest ache. "Willa Grant?" he asked gently. She nodded once. Her voice was gone. "I'm Rowan Dorsey," he said. "Your father hired me on as ranch hand before he passed. I came to start this week." She blinked, stunned. Her father had not said a word. He never told me." Rowan nodded slowly. "I reckon he planned to once I got here. I came straight from Montana, heard what happened when I rode into town." He paused, voice low. "I am sorry." Willa's throat tightened. She dropped her eyes again. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, Rowan shifted closer, just enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "You are not alone anymore," he whispered, voice so soft it nearly broke her. She stared at him, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. Something in his face, quiet, sure made her feel steadier than she had in days. He did not touch her again, just sat there beside her, solid. Present. Inside, Josie's laugh rang out, high and bright. Jonah shouted something about dinner. Willa let out a breath. She felt it leave her like smoke. "You really came to work here?" "I did," Rowan said simply. "I do not want anything from you, Willa, just a place to put my hands to good work. I figure your father thought we could help each other." She nodded slowly. "I cannot pay you much, not now." "I am not here for money." She looked at him again. "Then why?" He hesitated only a second. "I lost my family 2 years ago. I know what it is like to come home and find it emptied out." Something cracked in her chest. "Not a break, more like a door swinging open just a little. You stay on," she said, rising slowly to her feet. "We will see what comes." Rowan stood with her. "Yes, ma'am, do not call me that," he grinned just a little. "Yes, Willa?" She nodded once, then turned and stepped through the front door. Rowan followed without a sound. That night the house was quieter than usual, but not empty. Willa watched Rowan from across the table as he helped Jonah cut his roast beef, then lifted Josie down from her chair when she was done. He did not speak much, but his presence filled the room in a way that made her heart beat just a little faster. Later, when the children were asleep and the house went still, Willa stepped out onto the porch again. The stars were clear above, the moon low and full. She wrapped her arms around herself, footsteps behind her. Rowan did not say anything this time. He just joined her, stood at her side, eyes on the land. She did not move away. Minutes passed. "I am glad you came," she said at last. He turned to her. "So am I." And for the first time in weeks, Willa smiled, not wide, not sure, but real. By the middle of the next week, the wind had cooled and the aspens along the creek behind the barn turned pale gold. Morning came slow, with frost silvering the dry grass and the cattle moving quieter through the haze. Willa rose before the sun, same as always, but now there were boot tracks in the yard that weren't hers. Rowan worked without needing much direction. He repaired the south fence before she had to ask, stacked wood along the back wall without being told. He didn't linger in the house beyond meals, but his presence threaded through the day in steady, quiet ways. When she came in from the fields with burrs tangled in her sleeves, he was already rinsing the children's laundry in the back basin. When she dropped the water bucket on the porch from sheer weariness, he lifted it with one hand and didn't make a comment. That morning, after Josie and Jonah had wandered off toward the chicken coop, Rowan stepped into the barn where Willa was pitching hay. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old straw. She didn't look up when the door opened, just kept working, her braid falling loose over her shoulder. "I saw some rust on the harness hooks," he said, his voice low but not uncertain. "Thought I'd take care of it after this." She nodded without turning. "You don't have to clear everything at once." "I won't," he said, "but it's easier to sleep at night if my hands are tired." She set the pitchfork down slowly, brushing her palms on her skirt. "You sleep in the bunkhouse." "I do." "You don't have to, you know. There's room in the back room, warmer in there." "I know." He leaned a shoulder against the stall post. "But I don't mind cold." She eyed him then, wary without meaning to be. "You don't say much about yourself." He didn't flinch. "That's true. You planning to stay through winter?" "I was hoping to." Willa stepped closer, her boots scuffing the dirt. "This place, it's not just chores and cattle, it takes everything." "You understand that?" He met her eyes, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "I do." She searched his face, looking for anything that might falter under pressure, but there was only steadiness there. A quiet that didn't come from emptiness, but from something earned and carried. "I can't afford to lose help." "Not again," she said. "I won't leave you short," he replied. They stood there a moment, the barn creaking faintly in the wind, then she turned back to the hay pile. "If you're going to stay, I'll show you the bluff where the sheep used to graze. The fence line ends there now. I'd like that." She didn't smile, not quite, but her voice softened. "We'll go after supper." That evening, twilight settled early. Josie insisted on picking the last of the garden carrots for the stew, and Jonah fell asleep with his face in his bowl. Willa carried him to his cot and tucked the quilt around him without waking him. Rowan waited on the steps, arms crossed, watching the sky. "You ready?" she asked when she stepped outside, coat over her shoulders. He nodded once and followed her across the yard. The path bent around the barn and through the scrub, past forgotten fence posts and the bones of an old wagon wheel half buried in earth. The climb wasn't steep, but the silence between them made it feel longer. At the top, the land fell away in a flat sweep of sagebrush and faded grass. The mountains stood far off, blue and sharp against the fading light. "My father used to bring me up here," she said, standing near the edge. "Said it was the only place the sky looked honest." Rowan stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "He must have been a good man." "He was," she said after a pause. "Hard-headed and slow to praise, but he never lied to me." She didn't say anything for a while after that. The wind picked up, pulling at the edge of her coat. She didn't move. "Rowan," she said, voice quieter than before. "Yeah, you said you lost your family." "I did." "How long ago?" 7 years now." She looked over. "You never talk about them." "I talk when there's listening," he said. "Most folks don't want the weight of it." She watched him carefully. "I'm not most folks." He turned toward her then, his face bare in the dying light. "It was a fire, our place outside Helena, my wife, our son. They didn't make it out." The breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak, just stepped closer. He didn't look away. "I wasn't there." Took a job 2 counties over that week. Came back to nothing but ash and a neighbor's note. Willa reached out, resting her fingers lightly against his sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't pull away. They stood like that as the stars began to show just two people holding a little space between them where silence didn't hurt. After a while, she said, "You don't have to sleep in the bunkhouse tonight." He didn't answer right away. "All right." And they walked back together side by side with the wind at their backs. The first snow came early, soft, flaked, and slow, clinging to the fence rails and roof shingles like it meant to stay. Willa stood at the window, watching the white settle over the barnyard. The cattle had been moved to the lower pasture the day before, and the feed was stacked high and dry, thanks to Rowan's planning. She'd meant to write to the supply man in Rawlins about more salt blocks, but with the cold pressing in, her hands had been full keeping the children warm and fed. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth. Josie was curled on a quilt near the warmth, humming to the rag doll Willa had stitched from old muslin and yarn. Jonah sat at the table, tongue caught between his teeth as he tried to trace letters in the soot-dusted primer. Neither child looked up when Rowan came through the door, snow melting along the brim of his hat. Willa turned from the window. "How bad's the road?" He unwrapped the scarf from his neck, shaking off the cold. "Wagon get through if you took it slow, but the creek's icing over." "If we need anything fetched, should be done soon." She crossed her arms, considering. "We've got flour, beans, lard, might run short on kerosene. I'll ride into town tomorrow then. Leave before daybreak, be back by supper if the weather holds." "You don't have to, I want to," he said, cutting her off with quiet certainty. "You've got the children to watch, and I know the way." She nodded once. "All right." He hung his coat near the fire, steam rising off the shoulders. His shirt clung damp to his skin, and she turned away before her eyes lingered. That night, after the children were put to bed, Rowan stayed behind in the front room, seated at the edge of the hearth. Willa sat across from him, a mending basket in her lap. She worked slowly, fingers stiff from cold and wear, pulling a needle through the tear in Jonah's only winter shirt. "You always know what needs doing," she said, not looking up. "I grew up working stock," he said. "My uncles spread in the Bitterroot Valley. He taught me early, keep your eyes open, your mouth shut, and your hands busy." "You still speak like someone who knew peace once," she said quietly. He looked into the fire, jaw tight. "I did, briefly." She set the needle aside. "Do you miss Montana?" "Sometimes. But it's not the place I miss." She let the silence stretch. The fire popped, sending a bright ember tumbling onto the iron plate. She watched him watching the flames, his face drawn in thought, his hands still. "I never thought I'd have to raise children that weren't mine," she said. "But here we are." He looked up then. "You're doing it better than most who have had years to prepare. I'm doing it because no one else will. That counts for more than you think." She folded the shirt and set it on the table. "I worry about them, what this place'll do to them. They've already seen too much." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "They've got you. That's more than most." Willa studied him, the way his voice didn't waver, the way he didn't offer pity, just truth. "You don't make promises you can't keep, do you?" "No," he said. "I don't make many promises at all. But if you did," he met her gaze, "I'd keep them." She stood slowly, crossing to the window. Snow was falling again, heavy now. The porch was white, the world beyond it blurred and silent. "I don't know how to let someone in," she said. He rose, careful not to crowd her. "That's not something you force, it just happens if it's meant to." She turned to him, her eyes unreadable. "And if it is, then I'll be here when it does." She didn't speak, but her shoulders softened. She reached for the lamp and dimmed the flame. "Good night, Rowan." "Good night, Willa." He stepped out into the cold, and this time she watched him go. The snow swallowed the sound of his boots, but she stood at the window until the wind closed around the door and the night held still. The wind shifted late in the day, dragging a sharpness through the valley that warned of deeper cold coming. Willa stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed, watching Rowan saddle the roan gelding. He worked with quiet focus, looping the cinch with practiced ease, gloved hands steady despite the biting air. She hadn't slept much the night before, not from worry, but from something else she hadn't named yet. When Rowan had stepped out into the snow and closed the door behind him, the warmth of the room hadn't left with him, but her chest had tightened all the same. "You'll need to take the back trail," she said, stepping down from the threshold. The main road'll be drifted past the first rise. He nodded, tucking a wrapped parcel into his saddlebag. "Already figured on it." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded note, corners worn. "If the mercantiles run low, there's a list of substitutes." "They know our account." Rowan took it, tucking it away without comment. She hesitated. "If the bridge is iced, turn back." His gaze met hers. "I won't take chances." She nodded, then glanced toward the house. "Jonah's been asking about the stars. Wants to know if they look different in town." Rowan's mouth curved, just enough to soften his face. "I'll look up while I'm there. Give him a report." She stepped back as he mounted, the gelding snorting beneath him. "Be careful." "I will." He turned the horse toward the trail, and she watched him go until the trees swallowed him. Inside, the day passed slow. Josie helped wind thread into spools while Willa patched the hem of her winter coat. Jonah sorted dried beans into jars, naming them like soldiers. The fire burned low, the windows fogged over. Afternoon dulled into early dark. It was near dusk when the door creaked open and Rowan stepped through, hat dusted with frost, arms full of wrapped bundles. Willa rose from the rocker, relief washing over her in a wave she didn't try to hide. "You made it." Road held, he said, handing her the parcels. Bridge was solid enough, slower coming back, but nothing gave. Josie reached for his coat, eyes wide. "Did you see the stars?" He crouched, brushing snow from his boots. "Not yet, skies clouding up." "But I brought you something better." From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small tin box and handed it to her. Josie opened it slowly, then grinned. "Licorice?" Jonah came running. "You said we couldn't have sweets till spring." Rowan raised a brow. "I must have misunderstood." "Thought I heard something about a reward for good spelling." Willa shook her head, but her lips twitched. "You're going to spoil them." "They could use a little spoilin'," he said, meeting her eyes. Later, after supper was cleared and the children were asleep, Willa sat at the table sorting through the supplies. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her work. "You didn't have to bring the licorice." "I know." She paused, then looked up. "You remember what it's like?" He nodded once. "I do." She set the last parcel aside. "I keep thinking if I just plan right, keep ahead of the weather, fix what's broken, maybe it'll all hold together this time." "It's not just planning that keeps a place going," he said. "It's someone willing to fight for it." She stared at him, something flickering behind her eyes. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Doesn't matter," he said gently. "You didn't walk away from it." She stood slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the table. "Why are you really here, Rowan?" "You could be anywhere." He stepped forward, slow but sure, until only a breath stood between them. "I didn't come here looking for anything," he said, "but I found something worth staying for." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "This isn't a life most would choose." "I'm not most." The silence between them deepened, but it didn't feel empty. Her hand lifted, almost without thought, and settled lightly against his chest. "You're not afraid of what this place asks," she said. "No," he said. "Are you?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." He reached up, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, she leaned in without hesitation. His kiss was slow, certain, the kind that didn't ask but promised. When they pulled apart, the weight of winter didn't feel so heavy. And for the first time since she'd stepped onto that porch alone, Willa knew she never would be again. The last of the snow settled deep into the gullies by late November, and the valley quieted under its weight. Days shortened to thin threads of pale light, and the nights came early, heavy with cold and quiet. Willa moved through them with a steadiness she hadn't known she was capable of, her days braided tightly with the rhythm of the land and the people in her care. On a morning thick with fog, she found Rowan in the barn loft, mending rope. His sleeves were rolled, forearms dusted with hay, and he didn't look up until her boots creaked on the boards. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. He set the rope aside. "All right." You ever helped birth a calf in a snowstorm? His brow lifted. A few times. Why? She turned toward the ladder. Because we've got one coming down fast in the north shed. By the time they reached the stall, the heifer was already low in the straw, her sides heaving. Willa knelt without hesitation, brushing snow from her sleeves, and Rowan dropped beside her. You've done this before, he said, tying back his hair with a strip of twine. Twice. But never without Pa. He didn't offer comfort, just handed her the cloth and got to work. They moved as a pair, without wasted words, hands steady, breath fogging the air. When the calf came, slick and trembling, Willa caught it with firm arms and Rowan cleared its nose with a practiced swipe. The mother turned her head, groaning low, and nuzzled the newborn against her flank. Willa sat back on her heels, jaw tight. Rowan handed her the dry rag. You did it. She nodded, pressing the cloth to the calf's side, her hands shaking now that it was done. We did. He didn't move away, just sat in the straw beside her, the smell of hay and steam rising around them. I've been thinking, she said, voice low, about what comes next. He waited, his hands resting on his knees. I've lived on this land all my life, she went on, and I thought I'd carry it alone until the end. But I don't want any more. Rowan looked at her then, and there was no asking in his eyes, only the patience of a man already certain of the answer. I want you to stay, she said, not just through winter, for good. His voice was quiet but sure. I'd already decided to. I mean, stay and be part of this, all of it. Me, the children, the land. I know what you mean, Willa, and you still want it. I've wanted it since the first night I saw you sit on the porch and not cry in front of strangers. She looked down at the calf, now nudging at its mother's belly. I'm not easy. I don't want easy. I want honest, I want you. She met his gaze, eyes shining in the dim light. Then come home. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and certain, like he belonged in the shape of her life. Her hands found his collar and she held him there, not out of need but choice. Later, with the calf settled and the heifer resting, they walked back to the house together. She reached for his hand in the dark, and he gave it without hesitation. Inside, Josie and Jonah were curled together on the settee, warm in their quilts. Willa covered them with the old wool blanket and turned to find Rowan watching her. You fit here, he said, so do you. He smiled, not wide but deep. Let's build something that lasts, and they did. That spring, the cottonwoods budded early and the creek ran high with meltwater. Rowan built a new chicken coop with Jonah at his side, while Josie followed Willa through the garden rows, pressing seeds into the warming earth. The land gave them work, and the work gave them peace. Willa and Rowan married under an elm tree near the bluff, the same place where her father used to take her to see the sky. The children stood beside them, Josie holding a bouquet of early wildflowers, Jonah solemn in his vest. There were no guests, just the wind, the mountains beyond, and a promise spoken without fear. They built a life not out of ease, but out of quiet, enduring love. Rowan never left again, and Willa never had to stand on that porch alone. The ranch held, not because it was easy, but because they held each other through every season that came. And when the stars rose over the valley each night, they looked different, but only because she had someone to share them with.